Well, how did actually he was under contract to a different studio and he ended up making this picture at Universal. How did that happen?
It's a bit of a circuitous route of what got him into this. Some of you may know that Gene at MGM was not really wanted there. They really didn't know what to do with Gene. They couldn't figure out, they put him in a bunch of B pictures and things. And then finally, they loaned him out to CoverGirl with Rita Hayworth to Columbia, and it was kind of an overnight sensation. And suddenly, MGM decided that Gene Kelly might be worth something. They saw his alter ego number that he choreographed and decided he might have a role to play. But there was another thing that came along, and it was to star opposite Katharine Hepburn in Dragon Seed. And Gene had always wanted to appear with Katharine Hepburn, so he was so excited to do it. And he went in. William Tuttle, the makeup artist at MGM, said, "We're going to have to do something with your face." And so they took Gene and put gum over his eyes to make his eyes more open, and a rubber nose, and shaved his eyebrows, and to make him look like a Chinese man. And he went into the executive suites to watch the rushes with Benny Thaw, and from head on, and he had also taken Chinese, studied Chinese, so he could pass with the language and the sound of the language, and it was passable. And so they were watching him from head on. It was perfect, it was believable. And then he turned profile, and you saw that Irish aquiline nose, and he looked like an Irish Chinaman. So they decided that the only person who could really play the role was Turhan Bey. And now this is in the Hollywood style, typical style. Turhan Bey was from Austria and of Turkish descent, but he was going to play the Chinese in Dragon Seed. So because they were essentially slaves, they were like ball players and were traded, they decided to trade one Turhan Bey for one Gene Kelly. So Gene was loaned out to Universal for the role, and he said that if he had ever read the script and he had been an independent player, he would never have taken the role. He was a big fan of Somerset Maugham, had read the original novel, and said it was just completely twisted and didn't see how they could possibly make a picture out of it. And there are so many changes in it. But he went over to Universal to do this. Now, as Alan said, Deanna Durbin was this huge star, and she specifically wanted Gene to star opposite her and had requested that. And her soon-to-be husband, Felix Jackson, was producing. And this was to be the vehicle to make Deanna Durbin an adult, essentially. She had kissed Joseph Cotton, I think it was, in a previous picture, but this was going to be her first big dramatic role. And they decided Gene was the perfect partner for that. And a couple stories, if I may, tell a couple things about that took place on the set. Now, Richard Worf was Gene's buddy. They had done Cross of Lorraine the year before. And they were just breaking each other up on the set. They just kept laughing and telling jokes and playing games and everything. And Deanna and Felix wanted silence on the set between all the shots and everything. And so Felix came over and said, "Could you please tone it down a bit, stop laughing?" And so they said that they would. And Richard, we went into the dressing room, and Richard, as some of you may know, was a great set designer, had also been an actor with London Fontaine. And so he would go in and paint pictures, and then he and Gene would do that game where you put 3 lines on a piece of paper, and then you'd sketch from it. And Gene said Richard Worf would draw these beautiful pictures, and Gene had no drawing ability whatsoever, and would do these funny, bad cartoons. And because there was so much time, it was very, very tedious to light these scenes, and there was so much time in between them. So Gene started touch football matches before lunch and after lunch to keep everybody occupied. And on the opposite team was a young actor by the name of Donald O'Connor, who was under contract at Universal. And one day, Tommy Shaw, the unit manager, came out and said that the word had come down from the powers that be at Universal and said that Donald O'Connor could no longer play touch football because he might get hurt. And Gene said they didn't care what happened to me because I wasn't their property, so they didn't care if I got hurt. So they just played. Gene said Deanna Durbin was very, very nice. He thought she was a terrific singer. Some of you may have seen the short bit with Judy Garland and Deanna Durbin showing their contrasting styles. Deanna is obviously the classical singer and Judy the swing singer. And when it came time to decide which one of them to keep at MGM, L.B. Mayer wanted to choose Deanna Durbin, and the great arranger Roger Edens said, no, you keep Judy. And so they sold Deanna to Universal. And this trading back and forth.
This notion of, it's always struck me in doing research and writing how people like L.B. Mayer and Jack Warner and Howard Hughes, I remember Howard Hughes referred to Mitchum and Russell as his property. It is startling. It was a different era.
Yeah, Gene said we were slaves. We had no choice. If he had chosen not to do this picture, he would have stopped out and he would not have been on salary. It would have suspended his pay. So it's funny, this role is so counter to Gene. He said, you're not going to believe this was actually a hit. And he said, the only reason I can think it was a hit was that everybody thought they were going to a Gene Kelly, Deanna Durbin musical.
I think part of it was somewhat clever, and I don't know who was responsible for that, either Mankiewicz or Jackson, to tap into the kind of World War II malaise and the whole story of the soldier and all of that, and the Dear John letter. And I think part of that must have resonated, but the whole the whiff of incest that I referred to with Gail Sundergaard and Gene's character, that was really over the top for 1944, to put that out
Well,
there.
and as you said, so much of it is over the top. And in the original novel, it is not only the adultery and the prostitution and the incest, but there's also a very strong homosexual
Yes.
part to it that doesn't come into the movie. But it was funny when you look at this was just making me laugh because Gene, after he did For Me and My Gal, he was always doing the kind of first adult pictures with women. He did the first adult picture with Judy Garland and here with Deanna Durbin. And he would go to New York and he would travel with, do you remember the writer Walter Winchell?
Of course.
And the writer Damien Runyon. They would ride around in the car together and chase the police calls so that Walter Winchell could get the top story and everything. And so Damon Runyon had throat cancer and couldn't speak, so he wrote everything on little pieces of paper. And Gene said that he wrote, as they were driving around, he wrote a note about Gene that said, put a gun in his hand. That Damon Runyon thought that Gene should be playing roles just like this, that he shouldn't be doing the song and dance bit. So he had actually sent a note to RKO saying, hire Gene Kelly and put a gun in his hand. So you saw him with a gun in his hand.
It's an interesting segue. I mean, Gene was so overpowering in what he did with dance and music, but he was also a great actor. And how did he look at acting and musical and dancing? Did he view things separately or as a whole? How did he look at himself as Gene Kelly, the actor?
Well, it's funny, he never thought he was a terrific straight actor. He felt that he didn't get a great opportunity to perform straight roles. One of the things he always said, I was always playing to the fourth balcony on Broadway, and so he was overplaying, he felt sometimes. But also, it's very funny when I go around, people always ask me, they'll say, did your husband ever do any acting? And I'm thinking, well, what's he doing? You know? But there's a real distinction because Gene's whole notion was that the dance and the music should further the plot, and that was very different from what had happened in musicals pre-Gene Kelly, when you would essentially stop the show and do a number on a stage and then go back and resume it. So Gene's whole notion was that you make the dance, you integrate it, and it tells the story. And I guess Sing in the Rain is probably one of the best examples of that. But he wanted to do more straight pictures, but I think he always felt he was pigeonholed a bit as a tap dancer and kind of the hoofer, and that he really couldn't do much more than that. You see him in The Black Hand and then Inherit the Wind, which he originally did not want to do, but then Stanley Kramer mentioned two names, Frederick March and Spencer Tracy, and Gene said, I'll be right there. and he did feel proud of that. I think he felt that he really came up and met a different level. And there were moments in this, he thought that he said, I guess I was okay when he comes in to see Richard Wharf, and he said I was usually pretty good in the tough sections.
I mean, I thought he was good. Was there anything on how he got on with Ziad or Ziad was paying more attention to that interminable midnight mass service in Deanna Durbin? did he get any direction, or was there any recollection about Ziadmak at all?
He really didn't speak about him very much at all. I think it was just mostly about Gene and Dickie Wharf playing and playing games and things like that, because it was really about Deanna. This was Deanna's vehicle. It wasn't Gene's. And there's so many little things in here that just crack me up, because he would do this stuff to make me laugh, which was the funny faces and the little. And you said he moves so.
Yeah, when that one scene where he came down, where in the beginning, and she's down in the kitchen, and they find the blood-stained pants, and when she's going to send her upstairs because she wants to clean the pants, Gail Sundergaard, and then Gene comes down, and he just reminded me of my cat. He just, the way he moves, and he just glided down the stairs, and I mean, if you didn't know that Gene Kelly was Gene Kelly as a dancer, and you saw that, you'd say, boy, that guy, I mean, he can move. He just glides. It's amazing.
Funny you mention a cat, because it was actually a cat that taught Gene how to move he was studying in Chicago at the Chicago Dance Masters. He was taking classical ballet and also taking Spanish dance with a gentleman named Angel Cancino, who happened to be Rita Hayworth's uncle. And he was, when he was taking classical ballet, he would leap up and he would hit the ground, and he would hit it with a thud, and he couldn't figure out how to land softly. And as he was walking back to his apartment one day, he saw a cat leap up on a windowsill and then leap down. And if you watch, particularly Invitation to the Dance, you'll see him with that same kind of movement. So it was interesting that you mentioned a cat. And he plays this kind of lovable heel. I mean, here it's a charming murderer. It takes it a little bit further. But he had this kind of tendency. I mean, you look at Pal Joey, I mean, that's pretty dark. He's sleeping with everybody on the set. And even in For Me and My Gal, he's a little distasteful character, but he was able to, he said in this one, he could not believe that audiences would still be sorry when he gets killed. I mean, he just couldn't believe it, but he was able to do that.
Well, he had the Kelly smile and that Irish, I mean, you couldn't, even at the end when he's in there with Wharf or something, I mean, he played it well, but it's like, it's Gene Kelly, you know, it's hard. Your own story with Gene is quite fascinating. Could you tell us how you met Gene and take us through, you know,
about 2 hours.
No, just a truncated version.
Well, I think it's very funny on this, because they always comment that Felix Jackson was 20 years Deanna Durbin Sr. Well, 20 years, I mean, that's nothing. Gene and I were 46 and a half years apart, which is, we would have won the Guinness Book of World age differences, but Gene lied about our age when we got married. He added 5 years to my age, so very counter to Hollywood. So Coco Chanel used to do that too. I think it's a great idea, because then by the time that you go, gosh, she looks fabulous for 65. In a very truncated version, and I do tell this I've been doing a one-woman show about Gene, and I tell a longer version, but the real irony is that I did not know who Gene Kelly was when I met him. And I spent a week with him not knowing who he was, and I think I was the only woman who didn't fall over when they met him, and that may have been kind of interesting to him. So you have to come see the show, and then I'll give you the full story.
Oh, the tease. But I think one thing that is worth mentioning is that the time you did spend with Gene as a historian and a biographer, there was a lot of looking backwards at his career and his work that ordinarily would not have happened, because he was not someone that was necessarily rooted in looking at the past and doing nostalgia jams. So you found out a lot about, it was a journey learning about him, but also learning about his career as well, correct?
Well, yes, and that's interesting, because he brought me out here he brought me out to write his memoirs, and I was only supposed to come for 2 weeks, and we got married 5 years into that process. So, and I don't know about most of the wives in this room. I don't know if you wrote down everything that your husband said every day or every moment.
Oh God, I hope not. Gemma?
I mean, we would be sitting at the dinner table, and he'd say, "You're not writing," and I'd say, "I'm eating." You know, it's like, but I had the great privilege of recording Gene's words almost every day for over 10 years, and so it was this extraordinary account. And as I was telling Alan earlier, what was interesting is that Gene was so used to kind of telling this very succinct version of his life that you may read in some accounts. So it was very different for him to have somebody kind of going at it every single day, and this kind of reassessment and reevaluation of his career and what his contribution was. So fortunately, it is recorded, and I do have that, and it will be coming out ultimately. So because there's so many more dimensions to him. I always say he was far more interesting than he allowed people to see. There was gift with language and with having read all of Somerset Maugham's work. I mean, there are not many people who do that, but he knew things inside and out. And he was particular. He was very specific about how he wished to be remembered. And it was interesting. It wasn't for being up on the screen. As charming and as gorgeous as he is, he really wanted to be known for being behind the camera, for the choreographing and directing, and particularly for learning how to use the camera to capture dance on film and to create a particularly American style of dance. So interestingly, after this, after he did CoverGirl, which really hit the mark, then he'd already made the deal to go to Universal, but after that, MGM refused to ever loan him out again. So it was a very pivotal point. He had intended to go back to Broadway and never expected to stay in Hollywood, but he said, I'm going to stay in Hollywood and lick that camera thing. So.
Wow. You talked about Gene's legacy. What was he proudest of, and what were some things that he really wanted to do that maybe he didn't have the time or he wasn't able to do? What was he proudest of as far as his work?
Well, one thing he really wanted to do is he wanted to be Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls. So instead of Marlon Brando, he would have had Gene Kelly. But with the studio fighting, the studio heads were having a little tiff between the two studios, and Sam Goldwyn wanted Gene, but they refused. They were having a fight, and so they said, no, you can't have Gene Kelly, even though
no one got along with Goldwyn. He was impossible.
So he really wanted that role. He wanted to be Cyrano de Bergerac, and they wouldn't let him play that, I think, because of the nose. They didn't want that. And then he wanted to play Biff in Death of a Salesman, and Elia Kazan had sent the script, and Gene really wanted it, but Elia Kazan never called back. So I'm most proud, I would say, I think, again, it was very hard. This was not a guy who liked to sit around and watch his movies, but as we ran them, there were things in, particularly I'd say the American in Paris Ballet, that he directed the ballet and choreographed and performed in. And he said, I am proud of that. And then there are interesting moments in Summer Stock and things where he thought that he had done some of the best work.
I remember Debbie Reynolds talking about Gene as the taskmaster on Singin' in the Rain and so on. I mean, this was a man that was serious about his work, and if you worked with him, you needed to be equally serious or you might not be there very long. Talk about him as far as his work ethic and everything he brought to bear in doing what he did, melding dance and film.
Well, it's interesting. You'll often hear Gene described, and I do talk about this, but as a perfectionist. And he said, well, since when did that kind of take on a derogatory cast? He said, when you go to the surgeon, do you ask for the sloppy guy?
I love that.
I think professional might be a better word for it. And you're absolutely right, Alan, that he didn't brook any misbehavior, but he expected the same of everyone that he expected of himself. He was right in there. And yes, Debbie tells fantastic stories about the work, and that's what they are. And if you go to USC and look at the production notes, you'll see what the real account of what really transpired. But no, he was tough, but I think that's one of the reasons you're still watching some of these movies 60 years later. And he had a real sense of precision, and particularly, I mean, because he wasn't behind the camera on this, and he wasn't involved with everything, but on most of the other pictures, he was involved with the lighting, the costumes, the Technicolor. He was matching the colors. He was in editing in the camera. He was choreographing, and he was also doing the rehearsals with the MGM orchestra. He was dubbing the taps. So he was so multitasking. I think that's why in this one, he was just kind of goofing off with Dickie Wharf because he didn't have all those responsibilities.
Did he say anything at all about Gail Sundgaard? Or did he leave that lie?
No, he didn't. He didn't. He said it about Gladys George. And I don't know what else Gladys George was in. Do you know?
Oh, she was in He Ran All the Way, The Roaring Twenties, you asked, the best years of our lives, and so forth. Yes.
That's right. Well, he thought she was a great dame, and that was a really high marks for Jean. So spoke more about her and. What did Gene like when he was away from the movies and the dance? What did he like to do? What hobbies? What did he do to relax? To eat cold mashed potato sandwiches.
Okay.
And fried bologna sandwiches. I mean, this is a Pittsburgh kid. You got to remember. Well, at this time, away from the movies, which was very different from the time that we were together, it was volleyball in the backyard and then playing these games to the death. He did everything. He was a great competitor and loved to win. And so he played sports. People often ask if he worked out, how he did that. He hated the notion of going to a gym and working out, but he loved to play baseball. He was on the MGM team with Buster Keaton and
Jay Wagner told me he was quite a tennis player as well.
Very competitive. He was a ratty tennis player. He was the kind I played with him. I played with Wolfgang Puck and Gene and David Niven Jr. and it was hilarious. Everyone was swearing in a different language. Gene was the kind of rat who'd go up to and just chop it over the net. And I was trying to rally and he'd go over and go boom like that. So.
Now, Gene also politically was a pretty robust liberal back in the day, but he did not. He either dodged or didn't get tarred with the blacklist. But a lot of his friends and people that he knew did. Did he talk about that period of his life in Hollywood in the late 40s, early 50s at all?
Well, Gene definitely was not blacklisted, and there's a great deal of mythology out there and a lot of print about that he and his then wife were blacklisted, and Gene said absolutely, repeatedly, absolutely, that was not true. And that the reason they had left to go to Europe was actually for tax reasons, that they were sent. Lou Wasserman decided that several of the stars could go to Europe to use the frozen funds, just like General Motors was sending their employees over. So Gene went abroad because the taxes at that time were about 90%, and they figured this was a way to save on some taxes. So Gene said, I was making far too much money for the studio to be blacklisted. I do have his FBI record. He was considered a security matter C for communism. And the fact that he worked for Roosevelt and Truman, and I mean, if you did anything like that, you were suspect. So, but he definitely was not, and nor was Betsy Blair. So it's, but he said it was just a very, very troubling time, as many of you know. It was just a very, very difficult time as people's lives were absolutely destroyed, but he was safe from that.
That's good. Well, I know that you have some events coming up. You have something in particular coming up. What is that? And please share it with us.
Well, he's been very kind. The show, some of you may have seen it, the show that I did about Gene at the Academy of Motion Pictures last May, I reprised and did at Lincoln Center in July, and I'm doing it at Chapman University on June 1st, and then I would really like to bring it to Palm Springs. I think there's a considerable audience here. So I'm going to say, if you build it, I will come. So if you go to genekelley.org and click on Palm Springs and just register, then I'll know how large a venue to book, and we'll bring the show here, because I think it'd be really fun. It's a very personal story. Marvin Page was there, saw it. He can tell you personally what it was like, and it's a personal look, and it's kind of weaving film clips and very rare audio recordings of Gene. Gene used to sit on the couch and sing to me at night. And he would sing the songs that are in here. Spring will be a little later this year, and it kind of breaks my heart. But it's a way of looking at Gene on Gene. So I think I just encourage you to take a look at that.
Well, I hope everyone will get out and support Patricia Ward Kelly's Field of Dreams with Jean.
Yes.
And we really want to thank you for coming. You are beautiful, you are articulate, and you were a superb guest. And thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
coming.
much for having me.